Publicity efforts for this book have not been without their challenges. I have a really, really great publicist, but she's a little prim, and she had set up, one of the first things she did is set up this thing called a media lunch, which is when about 3 months before the book comes out, they invite newspaper editors, magazine editors, and people come to a lunch that's free, which is why they show up. And I talk about the book. So I sent Erin this note. Hi, Erin. Should I tie the content of the book to the menu for the meal? It would be easy enough. Just make sure there's beans on the menu so I can predict what will happen in 5 hours and whether men or women are more flatulent. I can introduce people to topics like tooth pack and intraoral bolus rolling and the miraculous gush of saliva that protects your tooth enamel when you drink something acidic. And Erin wrote back almost immediately, Dear Mary, I love that you're having fun with this. But I think for the purposes of this lunch, we probably don't want to be too graphic. Perhaps you want to highlight the olive oil tasted chapter. Fortunately, Erin's not here tonight, so we can talk about flatulence. And that question of whether men or women are more flatulent, I enjoy this one, partly because not just because I'm an immature person with the mind of a 12-year-old boy, which is true, but also because it kind of highlights these wonderful and surprisingly complex challenges of flatulence research. For example, if you're going to study flatulence, you have to come up with some way to trap it, to gather it, and then you measure it. And over the years, there have been 4 or 5 different techniques that different scientists have used. The very first one we're going to skip because it's a little grisly. The second one, though, is in the 1950s or 60s. This was in England, in Camden, which is not far from Stratford-on-Avon, and it is a technique that is what you would expect someone would do, which is they just put a tube in there, the tube goes up to a balloon, and you gather it that way. And the guy who did this research, his name, seriously, is colon leaky. It's possible he pronounces it Colin, but I don't care. To me, he will always be colon leaky. So colon leaky, so he has this description of the rectal tube and how it's taped here, and there's some sort of a dam or something, and then it's a very kind of complex thing, but he says, but it's quite comfortable and people can walk around quite naturally in their gowns. And I guess he means hospital gown? I don't know, but I was picturing people in ball gowns, and I thought, God, if I were going to Stratford-on-Avon to see Shakespeare, I would just ditch the Shakespeare and go over to that hospital grounds to watch people walking around in their gowns with their tubes and their balloons. So fast forward a ways to the 60s and 70s. The guy who has done the most research in this area, really made his name, is Michael Levitt, and I visited Michael Levitt. He's in Minneapolis, and Michael Levitt has published 34 papers on human flatus, and I spent a little time with him, and he's done a lot of work in the interim that he'd much rather talk about, like he's intestinal stirring, which is this thing where the villi of the small intestine, which are how you absorb all the nutrients, the villi kind of stir the contents of the small intestine, and he's like, I wrote the book on intestinal stirring, and I'm like, that's great, and I asked a few questions on intestinal stirring so as to display an interest, and then I said, so can I see the mylar flatus trapping pantaloons? Which is something that he invented, the flatus trapping pantaloons, and those have been used as well. But the technique that I love that he came up with before the mylar flatus strapping pantaloons was called a flatographic tally, and what that is, it's very simple. It's just somebody, whenever they pass gas, they make a notation, and then in that way you can judge how flatulent they are. But this is not a good technique because it's not fair to people who are dainty. People who hold, like say you have a given volume of gas, and if you're a dainty person who doesn't wish to offend, like my mother-in-law, no one has ever heard this woman fart, and you let it out in little tiny squeakers that no one can hear, you're going to have a massive pletographic tally. And the person who just lets it blow in one big gale force, basso profundo, fart, is going to have one. Is going to have one. So that person will appear to be less flatulent. But if that's it's not a good system. The next system that was devised, Michael Levitt devised this one as well. Michael Levitt at a certain point just stopped writing back to me because he just got so tired, and he talked about his flatulence work. He said, even now it overshadows everything I've done. When you go, I forgot when I was writing the book if Michael Levitt has gray hair or red hair or half and half, so I went onto Google Images and I typed in Michael Levitt, VA hospital, and the 5th image that came up on Google Images was a can of baked beans. And he'd so regret, he started, I said, well, why did you choose, if you don't want to be known, why did you choose this? And he said, well, at the time, it was a very exciting, the gas chromatograph had just come into use, and it was this new tool, and people were using it for all these different applications, and nobody had yet had the idea or the nerve to apply it to human flatus. And he said, my advisor sat me down and said, I think you need to study gas. And he said, oh yeah, well, why is that? He said, well, because you're pretty much of an incompetent, and at least this way it'll be something new and you'll get it published. So he did. He published 34 papers on flatulence. So anyway, and he invented the breath hydrogen test, which is a far more it's less entertaining, but it's very straightforward when you understand how it works. You just you eat some beans, and then quite a lot of beans, and then after a certain period of time, you inflate a balloon, a mylar balloon. Mylar is airtight, that's why it's mylar. So you inflate that, and the amount of hydrogen is the main component in human intestinal gas, and so you guys just missed all the fun. Anyway, so the balloon traps, you exhale and you get this hydrogen in the balloon, and the amount of hydrogen on your breath, from that you can extrapolate the amount that's coming out your rear end, because part of the gas is going to be absorbed in your bloodstream, which means it'll make its way to your lungs and you'll exhale it. So what you can do is just look at how much hydrogen is on your breath. So all you have to do is blow into this balloon. But here again, and I was at the Beano factory, Beano Corporation, which is the Beano people do their own research. There's all this research going on in flatulence. I pointed out to the R&D guy there, I said, so now let's say you tend to be the ladylike person who holds it in all the time. Aren't you going to absorb more into your blood and therefore exhale more and have an inflated flatulence score? And he thought about that for a while. He said, Mary, I don't know. I really don't know the ultimate fate of a suppressed fart. He's a very quotable man.